Greetings everyone, this is Connor from Dagora TV, and there's been some news this week. There's been quite a bit of details regarding Bethesda, and specifically Bethesda Game Studios, that has been revealed through a podcast that Todd Howard guest starred on, or appeared on, whatever you want to put it. It's called the AIAS Game Maker's Notebook Podcast, and it's actually from Ted Price of Insomniac. I personally didn't know this podcast existed, and this one's actually sent me down a bit of a train of, listening to a few of them, and it's actually really interesting, hearing, from the view of the developers. I've always found that quite fascinating, but, having like a candid conversation with them, they're normally around an hour, maybe a little over, a little under kind of thing. That's the kind of time they tend to be at, and yeah, I've really enjoyed going back and listening to them, but the Todd Howard one in particular has definitely drawn a lot of people's attention among our community, along the Bethesda community, as he's kind of revealed some little kind of bits of information that we've kind of been wondering about Bethesda for some time, and kind of a little bit of a look behind the curtain at Bethesda. And so I've kind of got a little bit of a roundup of the kind of important stuff, which maybe you've kind of heard about already from other videos that have been made. I'm a little bit late on this one, but also I kind of just want to share my opinions, because I know a couple of people have asked me what I think about some of the stuff that he said and stuff like that. So here we go. Let's start with the big one that kind of people have been talking about the most, and that's the new animation system that he said. It was on about the animators that are currently working at Bethesda Game Studios on a current project, and they're saying that they're looking at a new animation system they've got for the next game, the game after this one. They said they've been using the current one for such a long time, and the new animation system, the animators are looking at it and kind of yearning and saying that what they can do with that new system, and it's kind of revitalised them, because they're really much looking forward to it. And a lot of people have been saying that, like, personally, I'm not the most tech savvy person when it comes to game making and stuff like that, but a lot of people have been saying, and I'm judging solely on the internet's word, which is probably not the wisest thing to do, but they're saying to kind of have a brand new animation system to the extent of what he's talking about in this interview. It really kind of sounds like a new engine, and it would kind of make sense, because we know that the engine's getting tired and dated and stuff like that, and a new engine kind of needs to be in the works. And they've always kind of hinted at this. Todd, in that Game Slice interview with Jeff Keighley, which I bring up so much, said that that they need new tech for the Elder Scrolls 6, something that isn't there yet. We don't know whether that meant a new console. I think a lot of us looked at the side of the new engine kind of thing, because Bethesda's games always seem to be kind of PC first, if you know what I mean. The way that they kind of construct them, like, while there's a lot of mods on them and stuff like a lot of mods to fix them and a lot of patches needed to fix them, they've always kind of seemed to be a bit more of like a PC centered developer. Maybe that's because of the feuds that they've had with PlayStation over the years, but with the new animation system, it definitely sounds like they're going down the route of the new engine when we hear that new tech. But the big news that we've heard about it is that a lot of people kind of hoping their next game would have a new engine, as people kind of hoped Fallout 4 would have had one, because they was kind of worried it would be a bit tired, and they come out and said they've kind of expanded their creation engine. So for this new one, it looks like they're going to be expanding it again and kind of completely reworking it again, because they said that not for this current project, it's the project after. The current project they're working on is going to be with the old animation system, and therefore it sounds like the old creation engine, which is, not the best news to hear, because I think a lot of people were wanting, to kind of get some new tech, and kind of like see Bethesda kind of take a big step forward with a new engine. But that seems to be, at least we're getting confirmation it's in the works. If it's not for this game, it's for the one after, which is, like I say, I personally, when I heard that, was a tiny bit disappointed, but I wasn't surprised. I was kind of hoping, to see maybe, a big step forward in the engine. That could happen, with the work that they could do on it to bring it forward. Maybe that could happen, but we are going to see those, I think, similar limitations in regards to kind of a little bit of jankiness and stuff like that, and not necessarily being the right amount of fluid, and the physics kind of being a bit off and broken and stuff like that. But hopefully, with the games after that, they can really take that big step forward and kind of move on. But, it's definitely really cool to hear about how the inner workings of the team are kind of looking forward to moving on, kind of looking forward to what's next, so they can kind of really take big steps forward. It's kind of revigorated their work, is the way that Todd put it, and that sounds really, really cool, to be honest with you. It's not the end of the world, that they're using the old animation system for this current one, and there's a lot that can still be done with it, and being able to kind of not necessarily inspire, but to kind of get a lot out of that current team to be able to make as much as they can with the current one. Could definitely lead to a really good game in 2018. Is it going to be dated? That's one of my biggest worries. I think when we talk a little bit about what could be announced at E3 and beyond with Bethesda Game Studios and their games, that's been a big worry for the next one, with the up and coming one. But again, at the same breath of the stroke, the game after was the second new project that they've got after this current one that we know about before the Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be on a new engine, or a new animation system at least. Whether that means a new engine, I'm not 1,000% sure, but it does sound like it's a new engine to me, and a lot of people have kind of cemented that viewpoint in various forums and videos and stuff like that. The second one, which is the one that I got a lot of kind of satisfaction out of, to be honest with you, is that Bethesda Game Studios is now, Todd confirmed that they now employ over 300 people full time, and they said they use freelance editors and stuff like that from people from other studios like Escalation and stuff like that. And this was before the time that they announced that they took on the Austin studio, that they took on Battlecry's studio, which is the video I talked about last week. This is before, it was recorded before that time when they announced that, and that is over triple the amount. If it is 300 people, it could be more with the Austin studio if it's not including that number. But just 300 people, that is over triple the amount of people that worked on Fallout 4, or just about triple if it's kind of in the early 300s. But that's a huge step up. That is an absolutely massive step forward for Bethesda Game Studios in regards to how many people they've got. And he was talking as well about kind of how they keep in touch with the teams in Canada and stuff, and it's a big change having the one in Rockville, Bethesda, Maryland, and having the one that's in Montreal is is in different countries now. It's not all in the same same room that went onto the same building, that went onto the kind of the same studio area kind of thing. It's in two completely different locations in different countries. So having 300 people full time definitely means that there's a lot that can do. Obviously some of those are going to be split up into doing like we said, the phone games that they've got going, the remaster that they've got going for Skyrim, that they've done the Switch editions and stuff like that. But an interesting thing that Todd said, which I'll come into a little bit later on in this, go into a bit more detail, is he talks about how kind of everyone at Bethesda kind of tinkers with every project. It's not necessarily a Bethesda Game Studios, they kind of tinker with everything the Bethesda Game Studios are working on. Like, they'll do some work on the DLC, then the next day they might do some work on whatever the new project's going to be, the next day they might do some work on the phone game or whatever. And I think that's really interesting, definitely different to the stuff you've heard when you hear what happens at other studios. It kind of seems to be they're kind of stuck in the zone a little bit, and what they're working on the game, they're working on that game until it's released, and unless some layoffs happen or whatever. Whereas Bethesda, it definitely seems that there's a lot of flexibility there. And I think it's great that they've expanded, which helps, make bigger and better games as well. In my opinion, you could say more stuff could go under the radar in regards to bugs and stuff, but there's a lot more people focused on a lot more different areas. And I think that, in my opinion, having a smaller team has hurt Bethesda with Fallout 4. I think it didn't really give a benefit to them at all, in regards to, I think CD Projekt Red has over 1,000 people working for them, and we see the guys over at EA and Ubisoft with huge teams, and how much forward those games have kind of come, Assassin's Creed Origins, stuff like that, and Horizon as well at Guerrilla, and Bethesda's kind of, it's kind of stuck in its little, it was kind of felt old when Fallout 4 came out, so hopefully having a lot more people there working on that new old engine and stuff can hopefully bring the game forward a hell of a lot. A third one as well is when Todd was asked kind of what he kind of likes to consume in his spare time and stuff like that, and he kind of went on a bit of a tangent with it. He says he kind of still really loves worlds, that's something that's not really left him behind. He loves going in his entertainment, like he brought up Black Mirror as an example. Like he said, in every new episode, the first 20 or so minutes is kind of figuring out what are the rules of that world and everything, if anyone watches that show and stuff. And he says he finds that really interesting, and he still loves finding out the dynamics of worlds in his entertainment. And then he went on to talk about the worlds of Fallout and Elder Scrolls, and he says that they're not getting left behind. So that's obviously good news for us to hear. I don't think any of us are surprised by that. And whether that means content for the Creation Club, which has gone down so beautifully well so far, or something like new games in the future and something like that, which is cool. Or I think he's kind of hinting more to like the Fallout and Elder Scrolls stuff being on the Creation Club, and maybe bring out larger size content and stuff for it along the way. I'd be interested in that kind of stuff, but so far the content they're bringing out for it has not necessarily been good at all, to be honest with you. The next point I've got is that he wouldn't specifically say on anything that he'd like to do differently at Bethesda, other than, when he was asked, what would you like to do differently other than Fallout and Skyrim in the future, he wouldn't talk about it, and I think, that's because us lot know that they're working on something different to Fallout and Skyrim right now. They've confirmed that 100%, and maybe Ted Price didn't know that beforehand, or maybe he just knew that and was trying to try and maybe get a little bit more information on that, and maybe get a bit more information out on his podcast and anything. But I think he was just shying away from the question. So he says, a little, in a way, he kind of didn't really want to give any more information on what they'd like to do, because we know they're doing something, which is kind of cool to see. And I'm happy he kind of shied away from it, because, you know, he could easily go, I'm really interested in a sci-fi open world, and then everyone will be like, Starfield confirmed, kind of thing. He kind of didn't really give any information away. But he did say, on that point as well, that when he went further on, he says he doesn't see Bethesda Game Studios doing anything other than these big open RPG games, big open world RPG games. And Ted Price says that's kind of really cool and kind of refreshing to hear for a lot of us. And to be honest, I think it is, because that's what we look to Bethesda Game Studios for. I don't look to Bethesda Game Studios to get an Uncharted 4 like, you know, game or whatever. I don't look at them and then think I want an RTS out of Bethesda Game Studios, if you know what I mean. I want these kind of big grand open worlds. They've kind of know exactly what they're doing with that tag, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they can do with new IPs and stuff like that. And whether, you know, I think a lot of people look at them in Fallout and the Elder Scrolls. I think that's what the majority of the gaming industry looks at them as. But knowing how well they can make worlds and everything, seeing them take on a new IP and having a new world and kind of falling into that, it's kind of like, you know, playing Fallout 3 again for the first, if that's where you're joining the franchise for the first time, or playing Oblivion or Morrowind for the first time, or Skyrim for the first time, and not really knowing anything. It could be one of those moments, we never know, but just seeing how they're going to introduce a brand new world to everyone is really, really intriguing to me. And the final good thing as well was that we got kind of a little bit of a look into kind of Todd's life in a way, you know, which I kind of found really interesting. You know, talked about some of the media he likes, like I brought up, you know, like Black Mirror and stuff like that. And he talks about some of the games he likes as well. Like, we all would know he has a huge affection for NCAA football and wants that to come back. You know, big sports fan, it kind of seems. But he also talked about, you know, games that he really enjoyed as well. Like, he talked about, you know, Naughty Dog and stuff like that. And that's kind of really what he looks for, because he liked the way that the storytelling evolved in it and stuff and everything. I thought that was really interesting to hear. We also talked a lot about the work ethic of Bethesda Game Studios. Like, he talks about having these monthly meetings of where, you know, it's like 2-hour meetings where, you know, over Skype and everything, where they show basically everything they've made for that game in that month or something, or what they're going to make in the next month or whatever, and talk about what needs to be improved and everything. And talks about as well how he has this list of like what's important to the player and what's important to the developer. And he used this example of foot sliding. He says to the developer, like, it gets annoying when an animation doesn't work kind of perfectly, but is not exactly noticeable to someone who just picks the game up. But what is noticeable to the player is something like, you know, save files breaking and stuff like that, not being able to access your saves anymore, and, you know, kind of giving a bit of a reality check to developers, which is important, because I can very much imagine that working in that kind of environment, when you're really working on the minutiae and the tiny details, that, you know, picking up the game for, you know, kind of like picking up the game for the first time, and you can kind of see the broader picture and not really necessarily see that minutiae. And when you focus on the minutiae and the small details so much, the big picture can kind of get away from you and the big important things. And he also talks as well about how, like, when people play the game, like early dev cycles of the game, and they're being like, oh, the game's not really working well. And they go, yeah, you know, but you don't know how bad it was a month ago, and kind of thing, and how much they kind of work around it. It was just really interesting to hear. I recommend, if you're interested in everything that he's kind of said, definitely go and give the podcast a listen. It's a really good podcast as well. I really, really enjoyed it, to be honest with you. So that's everything that Todd Howard revealed in this interview, but I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what I'm kind of excited for Bethesda's next game, really, because I feel like there's a huge chance of it now being announced at E3 this year. I wasn't kind of overly confident that it would be, but now I think I'm pretty much I'm beyond the point of expected now. And I think the reason for that is because Bethesda having an E3 press event this year. You know, I talked about in an old video the pros and cons of them having one. You know, they're not necessarily looks on the horizon. They've got a huge amount of stuff to be announced unless Bethesda Game Studios have something. And the kind of guaranteed announcements for E3 have been out the way. So, you know, like Elder Scrolls Online and Legends are the kind of ones that we talk about as the guaranteed announcements. And Elder Scrolls Online have this Somerset expansion coming out. And the Elder Scrolls Legends have the Houses of Morrowind that are coming out around about the same time. So they've not really got anything to announce at E3, it seems. So that kind of, again, opens the door, saying that we need something big there to kind of make it. And having that something big there seems to be whatever the next Bethesda Game Studios project's going to be. Whether it's Starfield or not, we'll see. It's kind of looks like it's going to be at this point. And the way that Todd kind of sounded in this interview kind of sounds like him and his team are towards the end of their project, the current project. Like, he's talking about stuff that he forgets about in different stages of game development, and kind of looks back at that time and glosses over it. And it kind of sounds like, in a way, that his team's kind of coming towards that crunch period in a way, or, you know, it's kind of ramping up how much work they're doing on a project to get it out this year, you know, because, you know, the end of the, let's say if they bring the game out in, you know, they love November technically, we're in March at the minute, so that's 8 months away, you know, it's not a huge amount of time in the grand scheme of things of the way Bethesda tend to make games. So, you know, like, the Bethesda Game Studios cycle tends to be, you know, like that 4-year period, and if they were getting one out 3 years after Fallout 4, it seems like they're going to try and put a lot of work in that time, you know, not to the extent of crunch maybe that I know I've seen a couple of others suggested, and maybe could lead down that pipeline the way that Todd was kind of talking about it, and maybe he was referring to that in some way in his interview, but I think, you know, maybe he's talking more about maybe getting to that point and maybe realising that they've got to get so much stuff done for E3 and everything, that the game development cycle now is really ramping up and, you know, kind of like polishing, maybe starting polishing the game and stuff like that. Maybe all the stuff that needs to be added to the game is kind of done. Maybe that's the kind of the point that he's kind of referring to. So it definitely kind of seems like they're kind of looking forward more to moving on to the next one rather than being on the current one, because they know exactly what the next one's going to be. They know the stuff that they've got the tools to use for their next project. So it kind of sounds like they're coming to the end of this current one, and that kind of means that, you know, a game's got to come out soon when the project's kind of finished. So I think it is going to be this year. But let me know what you think about the interview. Did you really enjoy the interview? Do you think there's going to be a new Bethesda project out this year? Bethesda Game Studios project? I'm pretty sure there's going to be one. I think it's going to be Starfield. Let me know in the comments. Are you excited as I am to see something new? Are you excited to hear about this new animation system for the next project and everything, and how much Bethesda Game Studios has expanded? So let me know in the comments below, and I'm glad you guys checked this video, and I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.